my background is actually in software. So I've done a couple of startups, and the bigger one was Oculus. So I was one of the co-founders in the company, and my role there really was building Oculus Rift software stack pre-acquisition in Facebook, and then I stayed in Facebook for 5 years, and that was about doing things such as certainly putting together the teams around computer vision, tracking, getting all the graphics to work, and so on. So I've been actually in software land and the computer gaming space before that as well. So that's kind of my original background. And then over, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, I got very interested in longevity space. That's and started really learning a lot about it and ultimately investing. So that's really what brings me, I guess, to talk with you here.
So that's fantastic, and thanks so much, Michael. So what I find intriguing, and as I mentioned it yesterday, is that tech people who have entered into the healthcare space have been hugely disruptive in the way they approach things, because, as you know, healthcare is highly regulated. How they introduce drugs is highly regulated. There's kind of a pace that's very different than what you see in the tech industry, where the let's face it, the philosophy is to break things, right? So it's very intriguing. And when I talk to people in tech who have gone to healthcare, their timelines are dramatically different than healthcare people who are doing healthcare. Maybe Michael can talk a little bit about that perspective before we get into the full Q&A, because as I said, as tech people tend to break things. So Michael, can you talk about, like, why you might see yourself as a little bit more aggressive than others in this space?
Well, I think there's kind of two almost separate dimensions to this, because you got technology, health tech, where you are building tooling and diagnostics and things to understand biology. And when you are talking about tooling, it really is more kind of a traditional technology, because you're building hardware, which, and a good example could be DNA, sequencing back a while ago, and it's still hugely growing. And then you get these economies of scale, and you can really execute it as a technology project. So you get hardware, you need to get really hardcore engineering and software to make progress there. So for those companies, you can see at the more tech kind of curve. Now, the second part is, of course, anything to do with actual regulated space, and particularly drug development or something which will actually be a therapy. And then some aspects of diagnostics too. There you do have this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So it is often you're going to see a startup which from now to revenue is a decade. And maybe if it's like 7 years or 6, I'm like, okay, this is, more aggressive than you'd expect. But there's a couple of things there, though. There is kind of new mechanisms to do things with, like, orphan diseases, which could be happen quicker. There's also technologies which I think are promising in such as organoids, or ways to really evaluate how well something is performing earlier. So I'm optimistic for that starting to speed up, but it is still the case, and it's going to be the case, that that's more kind of slow. But the good part there is sometimes you can actually have a liquidity event before you actually ship a drug, because you just have to hit these certain milestones.
Perfect, excellent. So Michael, I just want to get back into the Q&A now. And how did you get into longevity? Why have you decided to make that step? I mean, you worked at Oculus. What philosophically has made you move over to this space?
Well, I've always loved software, but there was a certain moment as I kind of have done it for a very long time. I actually met this famous gerontologist, Aubrey de Grey, and he is known for really promoting longevity. And we actually were kind of presenting in the same small event and ended up talking about it. And he is he wrote a book on aging, and it really made me think about, well, where are we technologically in this? Because I've heard about biochemistry, I know we're doing science, certainly all of us have heard about sequencing and human genome and how that became this major theme of, the last decade before that. So I had a question in my mind. Well, are we actually at a point where we could do something more fundamental about aging? Because people have tried forever. And that's what caused me to be really super interested in it. And I started by reading his book and then going to some conferences, some in Europe and different places, and actually picking up. And I started taking some classes in the evening just around biochemistry and things like that. And I had this feeling which started to develop, which we're at this point in time where a lot more is possible and known and becoming rapidly known than ever before. And that's how I've gradually decided that, well, what is the biggest difference I can make? What is the most challenging thing? And I think in today's world, we have the challenges. There's like general AI is an interesting challenge, and now it's climate change, and then like human longevity. And it's kind of hard to say which one is harder. I would say how we work as biology and really what can be done about health and impact it can have on lives in terms of reducing suffering, really making people happier, live longer. I think it's an incredible field. So I really decided to dive into it.
Oh, well, Michael, let me give you some insight. So we do polling all the time in these events, and because we've had so many great speakers, we haven't done any polling for this event. But when we do polling, what we find is that things like climate change, ESG, they poll at like 5% level of interest from our group, right? But we haven't done the polling yet, but I will certainly tell you that if you ask people on a personal basis where they place longevity with respect to polling, given that the average age of our group is around 50 to 60 years old, I would say that longevity is probably in the top, 70%, 80%, domain. So it's very fascinating. So just one quick question. So, people have been looking for the fountain of youth for hundreds of years. I haven't found it. I will make a comment. My mother's almost 100 years old. She drinks very pure water. So she filters it, she boils it, and then she drinks it from another filter device. And she never has a cold. So with respect to the fountain of youth, why are people looking for it now? Is it in the water, or maybe give some perspective towards that?
I mean, it could be in the water. We'll have to study the water. But yes, it's been looked in forever. First, I'd like to actually make one point, because an important thing to consider when you think about this, usually I think more about health span rather than lifespan. So lifespan, how long you live, but we're getting enough understanding now to really see that most of the diseases and things we get, which kind of damage it and reduce our quality of life, are tied to the aging process. So once we really start looking at aging fairly fundamentally and seeing it maybe as a disease, but also really as a process which spins all these things off, you realize that if we can affect this, and essentially when we're going to be starting affecting it soon, we're going to get increase in the quality of life. So you're not going to be weak and decrepit and just live another 100 years. I don't think anybody really wants that, but you'll be given much more productive, more energetic, healthy years. And then, yes, there is certainly hope for life extension as well. So in terms of now, why now? There's a number of big themes which are all coming together. And I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say it's exactly like this minute, but I was very skeptical of biology in a way. Actually, all my parents are biologists. It's just sort of ironic, like my mom, my dad. And when I was young, I really got into computers because I thought it was a very creative medium, and I could build, like I was interested in games, software tooling. And as I learned about biology, I felt like, well, what can you do here? It sounds so complicated. We don't really understand it. And so I never give it too much thought. And that was back in the 90s. And as I dove in, like say, starting 5 years ago, I realized that we actually have a very interesting point. So I mentioned already Human Genome Project, how we decoded genome, and now we're able to basically sequence DNA within a couple $100. So the price just dropped astronomically, and it keeps dropping. And there is a number of other technologies. So what genome lets you do is let you understand genes, which is, well, not understand it, you capture it, and then you do work to actually figure out which pieces of it, what each gene means, and how they're different in people. But the kind of big picture of that is it's getting us a lot more information about how biology works. And then there's several other technologies which really came about at the same time. And I will call out CRISPR editing, which is you are able to edit DNA of cells much more conveniently than ever before.
Very intriguing.
And that really helps you do experimentation and potentially therapies much more quicker. I will say induced pluripotent stem cells, which is kind of came out from something called Yamanaka factors. It essentially discovery you can take a cell from almost anywhere, say your skin, and we can reprogram it to be any other cell in the body. And then just general tooling around it, and proteomics, which is looking at all the proteins and really seeing which they are. So you take all this stuff, so especially proteomics and anything that produces data, and then you combine it with machine learning and ML. So we got this explosion in ability how much data we can store, and we need it because anything in biology at this point is gigabytes, it's lots of data. And then you get machine learning and AI, which is able to handle it. So we're at this cusp where all these technologies, which really let us look at the molecular nature of things, and the technologies which enable it analysis are converging. So this is.
A quick question. So you're talking about data in healthcare. Can you give an example of like the scale, how the scale has changed? I mean, there must be. Is it like 100-fold, 1,000-fold? What is the, what do you see as this explosion of healthcare data? I'll give you a great example. We have there's a diaper company in Miami, Florida for adults and for people over 70 or 60 or whatever. And it actually tracks, it has the Internet of Things, and it actually tracks, diaper content, and it makes people aware that if they're living in assisted living, that they have to be changed, and send a notification, stuff like that. I mean, the data is phenomenal. There's another company that has a bed store, a bed for bed sores for convalescing, and it tracks everything as well. So any thoughts on how the data explosion is going?
I mean, it's huge because we're sequencing. So original Human Genome Project was like, let's try to get, understand one person, or really just, and now we're talking about let's get the sample from every person. Let's get it at multiple points in time, and then really kind of deep understand, let's sequence individual cells, and usually that's more for RNA in the state of a cell. But if you think about, we have 1 trillion cells, like you have trillions, like I think 30 trillion cells in the human body, and you have similarly trillions of atoms, so there's a lot of detail in molecules. So it's exploding on exponential scale. So what it means, like when you look at things like gene databases, the amount of submissions, it's like changes from like 10 to the 7 to 10 to the 8 within a couple of years. So this is really exponential growth. And it's tailoring, so it's actually hard to even manage it all. But I think what really inspires me about this is not data by itself, you have to study and analyze it, but what inspires me is combination of us having the technologies to capture these levels, and at the same time, experiment with them and have the AI tools and machine learning tools and ability to handle this data to understand it. All those things, in my opinion, leads to explosion in biotech and really huge potential in the next 10, 20 years, 30 years, as a kind of like the new huge increasing industry and with incredible potential. And then based on that potential to really affecting health in lifespan. So that's really, the answer is why now.
Excellent. Hold on a second here. Let me just grab the next question. So can you talk about COVID and how it's impacted people's perspective towards longevity? I mean, I have my own personal opinion, but you're the expert.
Well, I mean, I think in the beginning of COVID, everybody was really focused on COVID specifically, but it did a few very interesting things. One, RNA vaccines have been incredible. So this is a technology that's been around in research for a while, and this is the first time we had seen them being used in scale. And the remarkable thing about that is some of the vaccines we're dealing with were put together in a lab in 2 or 3 weeks. Like they could have probably tweaked and after that, but you take and you synthesize a part of a protein, like a spike protein, as an RNA, and you get this human cells to express it by essentially injecting that. And it's not having other parts of the virus, so it's actually able to protect you without bringing in the actual virus, which is an incredible technology. You can really try to apply to other areas of medicine, vaccines, but also like I know of companies, one of the companies I like, which is more in a startup, but they're looking at doing epigenetic reprogramming with that type of, technology. So so one thing we change is really belief in RNA tech, but also that it's possible when needed to get some of these technologies to market quicker. So it's usually regulation which drags out the process of vaccines and things into many, many years. And here we had to push to actually get this out. So the last, 9 months of this, it wasn't that there was issues of scale. Can you manufacture it quickly? But a lot of it was just, can we get it to the clinical trials? So I think people realize we can move faster through trials, and sometimes there's risks that we're taking. And I think it's a very strong message. And I would love more people to believe that, we should be more aggressive in this. So that's one thing we changed. And the other thing is it's been a lot of kind of money going into the biotech space. There has been a number of successful IPOs around this area. And it generally caused excitement because you see this biotech as a solution to some of these real challenges, and COVID is something which basically hit us in the face. And here's something we have technology to fight now, which is incredible. So I think it creates, belief in this, and it demonstrates that we can move faster in some areas.
Great. So talk about investments that you've made so far, and are you running a fund? How does that work? And are you raising a fund?
So, honestly, I have our fund is Formic Ventures, but really it's predominantly my family office money. And the reason is, in the beginning, as I got into this space, I knew limited amount about it, and I prefer to make mistakes with my own money than other people's money. With that said, I have certainly learned quite a lot and have a number of exciting companies which I'm involved in. So it's possible that we'll formalize it and make it accessible in the future.
So when you invest, do you have co-investors, or how does that work? So are you the lead investor?
Well, in the beginning, I chose to generally follow, but I've led a couple of seed rounds and have contributed meaningfully to some other rounds since then. So the thing about biotech, as I mentioned, I think it's one of actually hugest opportunities for next couple of decades in variety, and it'll grow incredibly. At the same time, it is quite risky early on, and it can be very capital intensive. Because think about traditional tech, 5 million, 10, 15 million into the company, you can have a very significant software company, right? And which is shipping product and showing traction. 10 million in 15 million into biotech, you're just scratching the surface, and you are just so far away from revenue. So that's a challenge, something you've got to accept, at least in some aspect of it, such as drugs. But so you kind of separate it into different pieces. So there is seed and Series A, where you're really trying to fund a new project. And then there is like Series B and growth stages, where you're looking at a company, at a technology which is closer to IPO. So from what I find, the company gets better and easier to understand up to each stage. So so two things I've done is I've actually looked as partially on a drug and like therapy companies, but also a lot on platform companies. So platform companies being like artificial intelligence and molecular and software systems, for as an example, for drug design. So like I was really interested in chemistry, so I was kind of, I would say, lucky enough to be in Schrodinger and in silico medicine, kind of somewhat early on because of my interest in going to conference and being connected there. And so this is more like Series B, Series C investment. And then often you can see an upside. So what I liked is actually diversifying all of these areas. I do some seed and Series A investing, where it may be a 500K check. It may be sometimes just, a few hundreds K, and then you watch it over time, and a year or two you'll add. And sometimes when you see a good team, which is, maybe a year or two pre-IPO, with maybe a platform of software or other technology play, which is not just drugs, and which diversifies them and de-risks them, in my opinion. And then you can participate in this growth round, and then you can actually get cash flow and exit from an IPO. So if you diversify it both ways, then you get to see hopefully some successes, and then you also helping the earlier stage, higher opportunity, more risky things. So that's how I've positioned myself.
So can you talk about your deal flow? Like, how do people know about you? How do they find out about you? How do they send deals to you? How many deals a year do you look at, et cetera?
So so I actually have at this point full-time PhD scientist in aging working with us. So we have kind of a bit more of a structure. With that said, usually I've discovered things at conferences. So it's easy to find general deals. It's a bit harder to really get conviction and believe that somebody is good and worthwhile. And I think that's probably true overall in investment space, and particularly so in biotech. But what I found particularly kind of helpful is going to some of these longevity biotech conferences, where you see the speakers and sometimes they talk about companies, and you go over mixers and you hear about, like, sometimes it's word of mouth, sometimes it's you talk to them directly and you discover this is a concept you like.
Yep.
Another thing is there is institutes and organizations. So for example, SENS is an organization nearby here in Mountain View, and they do aging research, and sometimes they have spin-outs. Buck Institute in nearby Marine, I believe, they have really strong team, and sometimes deals and companies come out of that. And there's other things like Salk Institute. There's also incubators. So I think we have IndieBio here. Y Combinator sometimes has biotech companies. So if you basically attend a few conferences and go to these kind of incubator type events, you are going to see deals.
So would you say San Francisco is the leading city in the world on longevity, or are there other locations that matter? I mean, obviously, you go to a place like Florida, there's a lot of old people there, but I don't think they have any longevity centers there. So maybe you can talk about
San Diego is really big. So there's a lot of biotech in San Diego. So I don't know exactly which one is big. So I think Bay Area, San Diego, and also I think Boston area, there's a good amount of stuff there.
The three centers, you think, at least in the US?
What is it?
Boston, San Diego, San Francisco are the three longevity centers in the United States, you think?
I think they are the biotechnology hubs. Yes.
I probably have to agree with you. I mean, it's amazing the stuff that comes out of San Diego, yet the investor pool is not great there. Can you talk about valuations in the space? Are they high, low, unknown?
So it's interesting. I think recently valuations have been a bit high, in my opinion. So you look at valuations are at different stages. So you start at the seed, and the seed, it can be from under pre 10 million when they're raising a couple $1 million to more likely these days in like 15s or like 12, and then it can go up to 20, and there something above 10 or 12, in my opinion, really deserves a good team. Like, I mean, clearly you want to look at the team in every company, but the more experience a person has, if they've done significant things in biotech, then and the team they put together, the higher the starting valuation would be. So I would say it's went up by maybe 30% over what it might have been, or 40% over it might have been, a few years ago in seed. So somebody who might have been at, I don't know, 9 or 10 valuation now might be asking for 15 or 16. And that's a question mark whether you're going to accept it or not. If it's a really good team in seed, I think it matters, but not so much, because it's going to be a while and it's going to be around execution. And if it's really a biotech and they have an opportunity to hit billion-dollar revenues long term, maybe that won't matter so much. But yes, it's a bit of a challenge. The other thing which I've observed recently is the late series, as in let's say Series C or so on, with companies which have good platform plays, are getting expensive. And because there is generally higher level of exits. We had successful IPOs where the stock went up multiple times, and in biotech sometimes after IPO. So people are looking to play that essentially, I would say, or that creates a lot of excitement in later growth stages, especially if they think an IPO might be a year from there. And I'm honestly questioning sometimes whether it's worth it, because you look at the company, you have to make this question is, how long will this continue? And often it justifies maybe that value, but it's not clear that it's going to be jumping up as much as it has in this period. So I think you have to be critical.
Michael, I have about a minute left, and I just want to thank you again for your comments. Can you give like some closing thoughts on longevity and what you think about? I mean, I know that Peter Thiel is big into this, and he's funding a lot of research, and then there's other people as well. Again, yeah, I think it's extremely relevant in the family office space. So maybe you can just talk about like the 3 main points we should take back with ourselves as we end this.
I think it's one of the more impactful things you could do. I mean, I think the part of me, I'm doing it is not just to make money, and honestly is because I want to support an industry which is really going to make a difference. So if you think about even philanthropic aspects, which I do a bit in supporting research, which can lead to these areas, and I think it's incredible. The other thing is convergence of platforms, software, proteomics, and drug development and therapy development is a big theme, and it's going to be probably easier to make money in some ways in platforms. At least it's more diversified. And I think you can also look, I think it's a really good sector to allocate if you can't, don't want to do research directly, find funds such as like Longevity Vision Fund. I think Longevity Fund is good. There's a number of new ones coming, which are supporting this industry. They are doing due diligence. They are focusing on good companies. So kind of diversifying in this sector, and as it grows, could be a good thing to do, even if you don't have the time to direct